This is Tom Morgan of The Leading Edge. I am very excited to introduce Mr. Brian Whetten. Now, this story began as many in my life increasingly do, with a cold DM on Twitter. And it became rapidly obvious that the gentleman on the other side of the messages was unusually insightful. And after a long exchange, I asked him if we could meet. He said, sure, when are you next in LA? I replied that I was on plane Wi-Fi and that I was landing in an hour. So it came to pass that the next day at lunch, I was sitting on the beach with Brian. And I typically talk too much, which is something that hopefully doesn't come out of this interview, but anyone that knows me will know. But for some reason, when I sat down opposite Brian, something deep inside me said, sit down, shut up, and listen to this dude. He knows more than you do, which was unusually self-aware. We chatted for about 2 hours, and I knew immediately I had to get him in front of my audience. So Brian, welcome, very grateful. Would you mind just kicking off with a touch of autobiographical information for us?
Sure. I am my wife's husband.
Great answer. Carry on.
So, well, let's start with the meeting at the beach. So I am the most important thing in life to me, in addition to my own spiritual journey and, life purpose, is my family. My wife, Nicole, and our 2 daughters, Annabelle and Leilana. And I'm the muggle of the family. I've come a long way, but my wife and daughters are far more aware than I am. My goal is just to keep up and not get left too far behind. So I came home from the Santa Monica meeting with you, and I was telling Annabelle about our connection. And she just feels the universe, and she's like, oh, Dad, that's fantastic. You Yoda'd him as a verb. And I'm like, I think I did. Like, that was the first chance. That was not first, but it was one of the clearest experiences I had of the universe like yanking on me and putting me in the Yoda role. I'm usually the wounded hero trying to survive the story, and it was fun. So I really enjoyed that. Nicole is my business partner, life partner, parenting partner, romantic partner, way too many partnerships going on, but it's amazing we haven't killed each other yet. And she is the single most aware person I've ever met. And I did not think that when I met her. I thought she was a cute blonde that, but didn't see much past that. Most wrong I've ever been on just about any topic in my life. And Friday is our 15th anniversary. And every year, it's like as I grow more, I see more of her. And there was a time early on in the relationship, she's like, Brian, you keep growing, good job, keep going, but know that however far you grow, I'm already ahead of you. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was arrogance. No, that was a statement of fact. So I do this work in deep partnership. And I get to be the one usually on screen. Nicole's a little more camera shy, prefers individual personal connections more. But I'm very grateful for them. And the journey of getting to the place where I could be married and have kids was a lot of what kicked off my own transformational journey, my own dark night of the soul. I started as a nerd in the cornfields of Illinois. In high school, my varsity letter in high school was chess. We were 12th in the nation my junior year, I will point out. And I was the one that the rest of the chess team made fun of. So extreme. I was a nerd way before nerds were cool, right? This was the 80s. And I ended up getting out to Berkeley for a PhD in computer science. And I'm there doing PhD research on internet protocols and internet software when the internet happened. So I'm at Berkeley from 93 to 96. And I ended up writing up a business plan with the help of some professors and some other students that I recruited, and raising money out of my dorm room at Berkeley International House. I think I was the first student to drop out of Berkeley in the 90s and raise real venture capital. So Andreessen dropped out of Illinois and made billions. Yang dropped out of Stanford and made billions. I did not make billions, but I had a wild, wild ride and raised a bunch of money. And we had a $400 million IPO with a company that bought mine, and just before my 30th birthday. And I climbed very high up the mountain of success very quickly, and yet was unable to be in committed relationship. And that led to a year of depression and crisis and dark night of the soul and reaching out for help, and ended up having a breakdown, breakthrough, wake up experience, and realized that, okay, everything I most want is on the other side of the wounding inside of me. And you got to turn the ship around. Like, if I want what I most want, if I'm honest with myself and say that what I really most want is to be married and have kids, which was true for me, I had to be honest and accept that I couldn't have that. I was incapable of it at that time. And so I left Silicon Valley and I did 6 years full-time coaching, counseling, healing, master's degree in spiritual psychology from the most astonishing program on the planet at the time. Spent 6 years there. Everybody else was there for 2. I was a slow student. I just stuck around and stuck around and stuck around. And then came out of that, and I'm like, okay, well, let me do something more purposeful. Let me spread the word in some way. And interestingly, I had some of the people in my community kept asking me for help. Like, some of the most gifted coaches and therapists and spiritual counselors I've ever met kept asking, like, Brian, help us with business. For you, money is like water to a fish. For us, it's a foreign language. We don't understand it all, and it feels out of integrity, and please help. And I spent a year saying, no, that's not what I do anymore. I'm spiritual now. I don't do money. I am a spiritual person doing spiritual awakening, helping other people do spiritual stuff. I am here to be spiritual. In fact, I want to be the most spiritual person around. And at some point, I finally surrendered and said, okay, well, let me help one person. And that led to 15 years in the coaching, counseling, healing industry, where I wrestled with the question of, how do you build a profitable practice with full integrity? And that was one of the most interesting and difficult questions I've ever experienced in my life. And I've coached or been coached by just about everybody in the industry at this point. Know a lot about that space, learned a lot, and then at some point got pushed out of that nest, like just as I actually was starting to feel comfortable and successful and at the top of that mountain, got pushed out of the nest, and it was time to go back into capitalism more fully again. And so now I do high-end executive coaching, leadership development. Nicola, my core purpose is helping upgrade capitalism. That's the purpose we align with, I would say, the most. How do we find ways to help business leaders practice business with a higher level of consciousness and purpose and integrity? And we've spent a lot of time in that question, and have a few interesting things to say in that space. But when I connected with you, I was particularly excited because, like, there was a pull there, both for who you are. You're a beautiful heart and a beautiful soul. And Nicole's like looked at you and said, "Oh, I love him. He's so he's juicy. You're a good person at your core, and you're connected to a community, right? That you're calling the leading edge, right? But it's like a new field of green sprouts popping up. And so ever since our meeting on the beach, I've been sitting with that question of, like, okay, what is this community that's popping up, and how do we help that? And in particular, you and I have been going back on this question of, like, how do really intelligent, really successful people wake up with integrity?
And I was worried that this conversation would be 12 hours long, because there's so much I want to ask you about. I mean, just to reflect on what you just said, like, your book, Yes, Yes, Hell No, really annoyed me because it's so good, and it's so simple. So I'd really recommend people read that book. It manages to say all the things I would have wanted to say about the stuff that I've learned in the last 10 years, but using using like 300 less pages, which is a real skill. But also, I loved how central your wife was to that, because most spouses rarely ever come up in this conversation at all, which I think reflects a degree of intellectual abstraction, which is something I want to get onto, because you have reverse engineered a lot of these wafty, woo-woo spiritual technologies and coaching practices with your engineer's mind, but seemingly without like taking them away from the magic. And I think that like where I want to focus this conversation is what I've seen in the first 3 months of this community is that the biggest failure mode, as you correctly identified, is basically highly intelligent, successful, high agency people immediately co-opting any kind of spiritual experience by intellectualizing it. And that I think is like, for me, that is like the most interesting thing in the world right now, because it is my biggest weakness. But I think for anyone in my shoes, of which I know there are many, everyone in my community effectively, it is the biggest burning question right now. And I feel like you have a lot of wisdom to add.
So I've been thinking about that, and I think in pictures. So I brought my crayons, and I it's hilarious because I'll be working with high-end clients, and I coach with crayons. I'm always drawing pictures. It's the way I think. I'll try to do as few of these up as I can. But I was thinking about our conversation, and I was thinking about, I think there have actually been 3 waves of transformation. And the first wave was the hippies of the 70s that were really just rebellious and horny. And they explored all sorts of fascinating things. And then the group that I really grew up in was the wounded healer group. People are very creative, very open, very intuitive, and almost to a person had deep childhood wounding. Like you just didn't get on the path in the 90s unless there was something deeply wrong with you that you needed to work on, right? And you are really, I think, part of and helping pioneer and help coalesce or bring together a conversation around what I would call the third wave of highly intelligent and successful people that have climbed Success Mountain, and now they're starting to wake up spiritually. And again, what are those specific dangers there, and how do we work with that?
So what is the biggest risk in your mind?
So let's go to your story. I read your book, and I skimmed the last 40 pages. It was
you missed all the best parts. Yeah, no,
of course.
You missed all the best parts.
I got all of your stuff, which was the stuff that was most important to me. And if you look at what started your journey and mine, one of the biggest issues was this question of like, okay, you've climbed high up Success Mountain, and then success starts feeling really empty. And like there was this void in your soul almost that just wouldn't go away. And then you start flailing around trying to figure it out. And for you, there was both the intellectualizing there, but actually, if anything, I think you, in some ways, experienced too much too soon. You actually blew your circuits out and spent years in emotional destabilization and trying to reconstruct yourself. So I think it's something a little more than just intellectualizing things.
Yeah, I think actually, funny enough, my story is similar, maybe similar to yours, in that the catalyst for my crisis was connection. You know, my crisis was catalyzed by having a son, and something in my psyche being like, "You're going to screw this kid up if you remain like an intellectually abstracted British dude." But the thing that you said to me when we met was this idea of like all of the groups that you've seen coming a cropper from this concept of repressed special. And I'd never heard it put that way, and I've never heard it described that way. So how does this manifest?
Yeah. So let's talk about what we call the trap of repressed special. And this is me as a scientist. So for 23 years now, I've been reverse engineering everything I can find in this space. And Nicole and I joke, half serious, that Nicole's problem is she came in sensing and knowing everything, but it's unconscious competence, so she has a really hard time teaching it. She can do anything, but she has a hard time explaining how she does anything. I started with none of that. I had tons of intellectual competence, but I had very little spiritual competence or emotional competence when I came into this. And so everything you talk about, for me, I had to figure it out emotionally. I had to figure it out in my body for it to work for me. But I couldn't turn off my mind. So I keep in this question over and over again. Well, okay, how did they do that? How did that work? How do I apply it for me? I've been in that question. And I've been like, okay, and what are the dangers? What are the different ways people are screwing this up? And this pattern I've just seen over and over and over in every community, every school, every teacher I've been part of in different flavors, different levels, has been some form of repressed special. And so that's what I want to really go into with you today. And I think it starts with, we're going to get to there, but I want to step down the experiential journey of it, because I want to see if we can avoid just intellectualizing and talking about it. I want us to try to feel into it a little bit more so we can find it in ourselves and help other people find it in themselves. So I talk about the problem of two bad choices. And when you start on this journey, particularly as a highly intelligent, highly successful person, and success starts feeling empty, you end up with what I call two bad choices of either up the stakes. I'm going to create a bigger game. I'm going to make more money. I'm going to go for another promotion. I'm going to do something bigger. Or success starts like becoming about consciousness and spirituality or emotionality, something, but it becomes something of a contest. It still becomes another form of success. Okay. And so like for you in your book, you were talking a lot about like wrestling with Moloch, this dark energy of sacrifice. And I think that there was some deep wisdom in there, in that you're in the question of sacrifice. What are you going to sacrifice? And I think there's a deep wisdom and an unconscious truth in there, perhaps, that if you kept on the path you were on, that was empty to you at that point, it no longer made your soul better, that you were sacrificing your time, your attention, your purpose, your life, your legacy. You were destroying your life, and you risked destroying your son's life in some way by being a role model for him in maybe not the highest form.
Yeah, and well, I'm interested when you say that pursuing the spiritual path. What do you mean by sacrificing your safety?
So as we start, if you really dive into the deep end of spirituality and you go for it, like you describe going hard into meditation, to taking that same level of will and drive and focus and commitment that you developed at Eton and Oxford and Wall Street, and then you like took this laser beam you built and you turned it and aimed it at this thing called meditation.
Yeah.
And you started blowing fuses.
Yeah.
Right? You started doing damage inside your psyche because you were actually pushing so hard. You had so much will, you had so much power you were directing at that question that it was actually somewhat unsafe emotionally for you.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
And so we both financial safety, because it becomes very hard to figure out how do you make money once you start waking up spiritually. And again, it took me 15 years to figure out how do you do that integrity and how to teach other people to do that. That's a really big open question that not a lot of people have figured out right now. And it's certainly not get rich quick. It's a slow pay your dues path. So emotional safety and financial safety are very, very real risks as we start waking up. And particularly people who are diving into psychedelics, diving into deep meditation retreats, blowing their Kundalini yoga chakras open. Like there's all sorts of technologies that have been developed over thousands of years for how to open your chakras, how to open yourself up to more awareness. And when us as highly intelligent, highly successful people turn the laser beam on, okay, well, this must be a technology problem. I just need to find enough of the right technologies to open myself up. Bad things start happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm seeing this all the time, that either people's egos co-opt the experience, or they get blown open and fry their nervous systems. Like it's endemic.
That's it. Yeah. Right. So that's what I want to spend a minute on. Is like, okay, highly successful, highly intelligent people, we start waking up. For me, it was like I literally started trying to get my ego to chase its own tail. I said, okay, my job, I want to be the most humble person ever. And I just watched it spin. But but in general, as we start waking up, we see things like loss of motivation. All of a sudden, the thing that you're doing 9 to 5 every day becomes empty, and it becomes this incredible struggle just to drag yourself through the day. Right? You experienced that for years, correct?
Yeah, yeah, at least
right?
Yeah.
And then emotional destabilization. And we're going to talk a little bit more later about why that happens, and that's part of the repressed special trap. A lot of people become really ungrounded. They start lifting off the planet, and they're just I'm gonna meditate my way to a Ferrari. Like I just gonna manifest everything, and there are no problems. There is no suffering. It's just me up in space. We see a lot of disconnection, people running away from the world. I'm just gonna go live in the forest and never talk to anybody again. A lot of people struggle to pay the bills. You have a lot of very poor, very wounded healers struggling. That's what originally pulled me into that 15-year question. The coaches selling coaching to other coaches, that industry that has exploded in the last 20 years is its own thing.
Oh, dude, that part made me so cynical, where basically my achievement-oriented brain went into all these coaching trainings. I got a coaching certification after a year.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I've jumped through this hoop now, so I'll just be able to get clients. And I realized that one, I wasn't actually a very good coach. And two, the certification in this case really didn't mean very much at all.
Oh.
And you just assume you're going to stand up a website and people are like, oh, I need a coach. I'm going to go with this one. And like, I do actually coach on the side now quite happily and successfully.
Yeah.
But the idea of making it my full-time living, like it's not something I want, or I think I even wanted at the time. But I realized that it's a bit of a Ponzi scheme, where I think most of the people making money in coaching are selling coaching certificates.
Yes.
Yeah.
So to be fair, there's two very different pieces of the industry. There is actually a quiet, highly successful, grounded section of the industry, but that section is the piece that's never seen by most new coaches coming in.
Right.
And just as a quick digression, if I was going to wish one thing for any coaches, new coaches listening to this, it would be we created something long ago called the 7 stages of practice building. And you start as a student. It's like your belts in jiu-jitsu. Okay, so you need to master each belt. You start as a student. You become an apprentice, where you're starting to practice your skills, because nobody's good at coaching after certification. You have you're a yellow belt thinking that you know everything. Okay. Then you've got to become a student, apprentice, intern. Intern is when you first start taking your first paid clients. You're not actually trying to make real money off of it, but you're starting to accept money. Okay. Then stage 4 is practitioner, where you're trying to cover your basic monthly expenses. Just get to $4,000 or $5,000 a month doing one-to-one work. Then you try to become a master practitioner, which is usually 10 years or more for people doing this in integrity. And now you've got a 6-figure practice. You're able to really build a solid business. Then you earn the right to be a teacher. Right? If you want to ask one question, if anybody wants to sell you coaching or coaching for coaching, how much money are they making and have they made selling their services to people that aren't coaches? Right? Because you need to have graduated through those levels before you've earned the right to teach, before it makes sense, before you really know what you're talking about. And then for teacher, you can start to be a leader and start to do things that scale. And if you want to build a business as a coach, you can. There are absolutely straightforward paths, particularly if you've already been successful, because that's one of the leading indicators of whether you can be successful as a coach, because you're teaching people what you've already done and gotten to, rather than trying to take people places you've never gone to. It's a very different thing. Okay, but it's not a $3,000 certification. It's a $100,000 10-year investment.
And when you put that against what people can earn, I mean, like typically the people that I've been interfacing with over the last 10 years, they're earning multiples upon multiples upon multiples of that. And the step down and the time frame involved, I think a lot of them just assume, as I did, maybe it's not fair, I assumed that this would be a a 1 to 2 year transition at most.
Yeah.
I'm pretty smart. I got this. I want to do what I do, but I want to help people while I'm doing it. And it turns out that was not a correct assumption.
Yes. And if the coaching industry would be honest about what the career track looks like, a lot of suffering would be eliminated.
So carry on.
Okay, coaches. Guru explosions. You and I have connected over some of the gurus we've seen that we've really cared about and believed in, that just like boom, and you're like, oh, ow, what happened, right? And if they can do it, what's to say that I can't too, right? If our heroes blow up, what does that mean about the path?
I think not just our heroes. Like, I struggle to find people that haven't blown up, right? Like guys I really look to as either, quote unquote thought leaders or gurus or spiritual gurus. If you look into their life history, like some of them came back from the dark side, but my God, it's an absolutely crazy list of casualties.
Yep. So this question, and I've been lucky in that I've chanced into some of the higher integrity teachers in the space. And so I've gotten to, and they've had their problems too, but through grace, I've been gifted with some really good, exceptional role models over the last 20 some years. So there's a wide range, but I do think that this third wave, it's like it feels so new to everybody that I think a lot of mistakes are being relearned the hard way right now.
Such as?
Individual, but that's what we're going to cover today. So spiritual arrogance, needing to save others, I've got to be the biggest purpose in the room. All of those are different examples of what happens when highly successful people start getting on this path of waking up. So the trap of Repressed Special, which is what you and I really bonded about. So the fundamental problem is highly intelligent, highly successful people have big egos by definition. Okay, but being spiritual is about doing something with your ego. It's clearly that worshiping your ego is not the goal, right? We're not really necessarily clear what the goal really should be, but worshiping your ego is not it. And so we get to this problem of, okay, I've got a really big effing ego, and what do I do with that? Like in your book, you mentioned like you had one teacher at one point who like treated the ego as the enemy. You need to pummel it. You need to beat it into submission.
And I killed it for like a few days,
right?
And I melted into nothingness, and it was one of the scariest experiences of my life. And I was like, oh, you know what? I need an ego to like live in the world and to like
yes.
That was an idiotic early stage mistake of which there were so many.
Yes. To be fair, reading through your book was painful for me. I'm like, oh no, that's wrong. Train.
Oh, I've made every mistake. It's humiliating. Yeah.
So Repressed Special, what do we do with our big egos? And so what we tend to do is find some way to repress our ego. And specifically, we tend to repress our need to be special. And that doesn't work. So you're a fan of Jung, and 4 of the wisest words that have ever been spoken by any person on this planet: what we resist persists. If you try to fight your ego, repress your ego, shove down your need to be special, it blows up in other ways. So that doesn't work. And what I want to do is start to really unpack that, starting with the first critical awareness, the critical distinction that spiritual awareness and spiritual development are 2 very, very, very different things. And usually when we start in on this journey of awakening, we're chasing awareness. Okay? Nicole, since she was young, has been able to walk into a room and feel the discrete energetic body and emotional state of every person in that room at the same time.
Yeah. Now that would strike me as nonsense had that not actually happened to me for a couple of days physiologically, where anyone who came within 12 feet of me, I could feel. It went away, but now I believe that that's actually a thing. Carry on.
Okay, so imagine growing up with that, being 5 years old and feeling the suffering of the world every time you move.
Ugh, Jesus, yeah.
Okay? That's not integrated spiritual development. That's a recipe for suffering. Okay? So awareness, again, those of us with big brains and big pedigrees and resumes, we tend to chase awareness. Let me go to Burning Man and I'm going to wake up. I'm going to be more aware. I'm going to go do a sacred drug journey and wake up. It's all awareness, awareness, awareness. And we start competing over who's more aware. Oh no, I'm aware more than you are. Oh no, I don't think so. I see all of that and more. No, no one sees more than I do. Okay, it sounds ridiculous, but there's a fair bit of that running around.
Yep.
Okay, so this critical question, to wake up with integrity, means figuring out how to move from chasing spiritual awareness to embracing spiritual development. And I want to unpack that because there's a lot there. So we're going to spend a fair bit of time on this. So in my book, Yes, Yes, I'll Know, I talk about the 3 selves. And this is a huge oversimplification. All these things are oversimplification. For those of you with big fat brains watching this and you know it's an oversimplification, yes, we get that. Well done. But as an oversimplification, you've got your body, you've got your mind, you've got your soul or spirit, whatever word we want to use. Okay. So we've got 3 selves, and the primary voice of the body is the voice of fear. There are many voices in there, but fear is the dominant one. The dominant voice of your mind and ego is reason, and the dominant voice of your soul is intuition, which curiosity is a manifestation of intuition. That question you have of, well, who is it that's directing your attention? It's your soul or spirit or higher self or whatever it is we want to talk about, okay? And the thing is when we start the awakening journey, this is mine. I have a body. This is me. I am my mind and ego. And this is the land of mystery. This is the unknown. Okay? So we start on the journey of awakening, and we start exploring the land of mystery. We start expanding our spiritual awareness. In effect, we start listening to our soul. We start opening up the channels that open up to the higher dimensions of self. It doesn't mean that we are our soul. It means we're hearing our soul or our spirit or the universe or whatever words you want to put on it. Okay? And so the ego is still the center of gravity, and it takes the energies that are coming in, the awarenesses that are coming in, and it blows up like a hot air balloon. And it says, look at me, I'm spiritual. I am so aware. But that's a categorical error. By definition, the ego is not spiritual. That's not its job. It's not bad. It's not that ego is a problem or an enemy to be conquered, but it's not the soul. They're different things. Okay? And there's this fundamental law at the base of reality that the higher can see the lower, but the lower cannot see the higher.
Tell me more.
Your mind can see your body. Your body cannot see your mind. Okay? Biology can see chemistry, can see physics. But you've got all of these materialist physics who think that they understand everything of the universe, and they don't understand why the laws of physics can't predict anything higher than physics. Well, that's the way the game is wired at its core. Chemistry can see physics, but physics can't see chemistry. It's a new emergent level of complexity. The higher can see the lower, but the lower can't see the higher.
Right. Okay. Makes sense.
Okay. So the soul is always aware of the mind and the ego.
Right.
The mind and the ego are almost never aware of the soul.
But why does it then always feel like you're not coming from your soul? Or maybe it does. Is that what like witness consciousness is?
So witness consciousness is complicated. Again, witness consciousness is an awareness, it's not an identity.
Yeah.
It's almost by definition the thing that doesn't have an identity. It's like it's pulling the lens on the telescope further and further back. Okay, and it's critical. It's a super important practice. It's a phenomenal technology, but it's not enough by itself.
Right. So listeners will be absolutely shocked, I say, to learn that I went through the stage of spiritual inflation and narcissism and all of that nonsense. How do you either avoid that, or like, what do you do about it?
Right, so let's talk about spiritual development. So you've read Keegan, Wilbur. Did you ever know Houston Smith?
No, never.
Oh, so I met with him before he died. One of the most divine beings I've ever met. The father of comparative religion. His book, The Religions of the World. The last 8 pages of that book are the most distilled wisdom I've ever encountered in my life.
Wow. Okay.
Skip to 8 pages if you want to, but he lovingly goes through all of the major religions of the world. And then he says, okay, if we were to filter through those and see what they have in common, and he calls it the winnowed wisdom of mankind. And he called it the perennial philosophy. It's like the synthesis of what everybody agrees on over thousands of years. And one of the fundamental parts of that is this progression of identification from matter to body to mind to soul to spirit. And that's what Wilbur's describing in different language. That's what Keegan's talking about in terms of I becoming it. We got many people seeing the same thing from different lenses. Okay, so the heart of development, psychological development, spiritual development, physical development, the heart of emerging into higher orders of complexity, which is one of the most interesting questions right now. How does that happen? You know, what's the math of emergence? There's a lot of fascination on that question right now, like attractors and what are pulling us up and all of that, right? Okay, so the heart of it is a process where I becomes it and me becomes mine. So we go from being an ego to having an ego. Your identification, so just like as you grow up from being a child, you start out thinking that you are your body, and then you realize that I have a body. And then you think you are your emotions. And then you realize you have emotions. And then you realize, oh, I am my mind and my successes. And then at some point, and this takes a lot of work, spiritual development is the process of shifting from this being the land of mystery to being the land of me. And the ego becomes using the language of the master and the emissary. The soul becomes the master, this becomes the emissary.
That makes immediate sense to me, but the only thing that I would question is that body being mine implies like a little bit of separation there. And a lot of the work that I've done implies that like the more disembodied you are, the more at risk you are of kind of this intellectualization, and actually like the mind-body split should kind of not exist. Am I thinking about that right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're leading perfectly into the next picture.
Oh, great. Okay.
Well done. Okay. So what's missing on that picture is shadow.
Yeah.
Okay. So what happens for all of the pieces that we don't own? So we start our journey, we have mystery, we have me, we have mine, my body, and then we have all the stuff that we haven't owned, our negative emotions, our unconscious pain, our wounding that we haven't yet been able to process, as well as any needs that we don't own. Okay, any human needs that we're trying to disown, such as our need to be special, those all get shoved down in the shadow where we declare those as not mine.
Right.
So we have mystery, me, mine, and not mine. Okay, and the fundamental problem here, the trap, is as you start growing awareness. So we start meditating, we start doing all of these technologies for opening up our awareness of the mystery realm. We actually create more space, more distance between our awareness and where we're trying to live and our shadow.
Right.
And so we actually dissociate from our shadow the more we meditate. And that is a deeply unintegrative experience. And what it tends to do is create emotional destabilization and oscillation. So we're chasing the high, the bliss up here, but we've got this huge rubber band to this huge anchor down here called shadow. And at some point, the rubber band snaps us back down here into depression and hopelessness and dark night of the soul, but we don't know what to do with it. And so we tend to try to run back up here. And you can spend a lot of time bipolar bouncing between heaven and earth, because the shadow can't be, you've got to deal with the shadow. It's the root of everything. It's the ballast that holds it down. This is the work, is right here.
Amazing. Tell me how.
Okay, so it's obvious. The answer clearly must be that if you want to be spiritual, you can't be smart and you can't be successful. You know, it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than a rich man, all that. No. So not that, but it is an honest, deep question. Okay, and that there are some ways that it's important to just start by recognizing that there is an extra set of difficulties added to the game if you come to it very smart and very successful. Okay, there's an extra level of humility and awareness of the pitfalls ahead of you that is worth slowing down and paying attention to. Okay,
so
that's what
your brain can also conceptualize things that it should be experiencing very quickly, but I'm sure you'll get on to discussing that as well.
Totally. I'm not going to talk about as much about that specifically, but yes, that's absolutely part of that. Okay. So one of the hallmarks of spiritual development and psychological development is a crisis that feeds on itself. So when you are in depression and you're diagnosing yourself as mentally ill or getting diagnosed as mentally ill, and that makes you feel hopeless, and then you're never going to get out, and that's really depressing.
Yep.
Right? And so you can spiral into very, very dark places when it's like when a microphone gets held in front of a speaker and that feedback loop kicks in. Okay, so that's the heart of crisis. We've done a lot of work with fear with a lot of different people, including a remarkable number of really, really, really successful executives who have a remarkable level of phobia and anxiety and stuff that they're hiding behind the curtain and then judging themselves for because they can't share their fears with anybody. And in almost every case, there's feedback loops built up in their nervous system where they're scared of their fear. They're scared of their anxiety, and that loops on itself. So you became scared of your depression, and it creates this microphone in front of the speaker thing.
Exactly what happened, yes.
Right? So there's a very specific microphone in front of the speaker pattern here that I want to slow down and unpack. This is the trap of Repressed Special, and it's a feedback loop. So I'm going to talk about these. I'll just walk through them, and then we'll go through each of these in detail. Okay. So the first one is spiritual power. That as you have more awareness, that means you have more power. Okay. And then that automatically creates spiritual pride. It's hardwired in there. With power comes pride always. It's the ego inflating. Look, I'm so spiritual. It's a misunderstanding between the ego and spirit. But it's not that happens to some bad people out there. It's hardwired. Okay, more spiritual power equals more spiritual pride. Because we're spiritual people and we're not supposed to have a big fat ego, we're not supposed to be prideful and have all these thoughts of, look at me, I'm so much better than them. We start repressing that. We try to bury it away. And so we push it down into our shadow. That creates this nasty internal conflict between our consciousness that we're trying to push up into the clouds and our shadow that's trying to yank us back down, that bipolar swing that I talked about. And then we find ourselves constantly feeling deeply insecure and alone because of this conflict. And so we find ourselves asking this question over and over and over again, well, am I better or less than that person? Am I superior or inferior? Am I good enough? There's this feeling of never enough that shows up here. And there's nothing we can do in this cycle to get out of that. We still try to press it down, but it's root, okay? And then that creates more external conflict. So now we're projecting our fears on everybody else. We're trying to put other people down, but also spiritually. right? The number of ways that I have seen really spiritual people insult other spiritual people, it's creative. Like it's an art form, the ways that spiritual communities and transformational communities and coaching communities are constantly jockeying for position.
Anyone that calls like other human beings NPCs, for me,
Right.
always like a yellow to a red flag. I'm like,
Right.
because they're less awake, they're somehow less human. Like it
Right.
really triggers me. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And so then that external conflict, now our lives aren't working well, so clearly we need more power. And the cycle loops. Okay, so just like you looped in depression for years, we can loop in spiritual pride for decades, and then something destabilizes it. We can try to control it and keep it under wraps, and everybody's trying to pretend that they're not there, and it's just dominant everywhere, but everybody's trying to control it and pretend it's not there, and then boom, it blows up.
How do you see that blow up? I mean, was that all the ways you listed up top?
All the ways we listed.
Yeah.
So this is the root way that everybody blows up. And we try to escape into spiritual bypass. Yeah. We're leaders, and all of a sudden we go full guru. Right? We're coach the coach, where we're trying to constantly jockey for position. Where are you at in the triangle of coaches? Okay. There's many different ways that manifests, but all of those symptoms this is at least part of the problem. Okay, so this is the root. This is what we need to slow down and figure out. And this is what, in 23 years of reverse engineering, I haven't seen anybody fully address. So that's why I'm excited to really pull us apart.
Me too.
Okay, so step one, we'll just slow down and do this again because it's so important. Step one is power. Awareness is power. As you start having curiosity pull you interesting places, that's a form of power. As your empathy turned on and you can start to feel what everybody else is feeling for a few days, that's power. Okay, so all these channels of power start turning on, and with power always comes pride. Right? There's the same power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. Spiritual power corrupts the same way. Okay, and it does it by blowing the ego up like a hot air balloon. Okay, now in a certain way it's supposed to, and once you learn how to put the right container around it, that becomes the heart of the journey, because it allows you to see the ego. And then, oh, there's another piece of me that I'm still identifying with, so let me work on releasing that identification and become a little more identified with my soul. Okay, so there's a virtuous cycle on the other side of this, but we have to start by seeing the vicious cycle first. Okay, so this is how power corrupts, is through spiritual pride. And again, this fundamental trap, this fundamental problem is the soul can see the ego, but the ego can't see the soul. And so the ego naturally just assumes, I'm the highest apex predator on this particular food chain. It must be me that is having all these experiences. I'm the spiritual one. Okay, the ego being what it is, it tries to use that to compare itself to other people, but it thinks, oh, I am so spiritual. In fact, I am more spiritual than you are. Right? Anytime that is showing up in your head, and it should, if you're on this path. That's not, again, it's not that bad people do that. This is the path. As you wake up, spiritual pride's automatic. Okay, so then the next step is, okay, well, that's clearly bad. That's my ego. I need to conquer it. I need to control it. So we bury it, we repress it, we push it down. It's an enemy to be conquered. But significance, and we're going to go into this in more depth in a minute, significance is one of the basic human needs. It's wired into your core. It is, to be alive is to need to be special. And so when we try to control our ego and turn off our special needs, that's just what we resist persists, and you're just asking for suffering. Okay, so the more we try to starve the beast, the hungrier it gets. And when that beast gets hungry, it feeds. One of the things about, like, you're a fan of Ian's and neuroscience and everything. I do a lot with just the three brains, a much simpler model. And the more primitive the brain is, as you go from neocortex down towards limbic brain, the higher priority it has on your nervous system. when your fear brain, your amygdala, decides it wants to be terrified, your neocortex does not have a say. It doesn't get to come in and say, that's dumb. I would like to turn off this fear now, please. Okay, so our needs are wired at base root, at the root of the nervous stem. And if you try to starve this beast wins. It gets hungry and hungrier, and sooner or later it feeds. Right? You've experienced it. I've experienced it. It's biology. Okay, so then we've got this internal conflict that shows up between the high self, our heart, our soul, the piece of us that naturally does want to lift into higher consciousness, and this bigger and bigger pile of repressed shadow down here. And so we get this swing going. And if you do a lot of shadow work, and this is deep wisdom from Ron and Mary Hulnick, our teachers at the University of Santa Monica years ago, they said, and this was my experience in following this particular pathway, they say if you do enough shadow work, what you get to at the bottom is this like divine loneliness where there's this perceived separation between you and the universe, and you don't know why. And it's like almost like this guilt of I must have done something. It's almost like a feeling of original sin, but without any guilt or judgment on it. It's just this sense that at the root of all pain and suffering is perceived separation from love, perceived separation from spirit. Okay? So that intellectualizing, chasing into your head is also a way of creating perceived separation, of locking yourself away in your own brain. And that's lonely.
Well, I mean, when I was going through this, for a long time, the only thing I could feel was shame. And I read an enormous amount about shame, a lot of Brene Brown's work, Carl Jung called it the soul-eating emotion. But it seemed that at the bottom of everything, in a very visceral way, for me, there was just shame, which, is ultimate separation.
It absolutely. Yep. That's the shunning. It's separation at the level of shunning. Absolutely. Yep.
But then it comes back up when you hit a point of success in life and you feel shame again.
Yep.
Why, if I'm so successful, why aren't I happy?
Yes. Yep. So there's 1,000 ways that this perceived separation shows up. Right? It's a root ache. At its heart, it's a lack of integration. Right? So you're very passionate about the left hemisphere, right hemisphere. That model works really well for you. Right hemisphere is much more integrated. It's much more aware. It's trying to bring everything together. Left hemisphere is much more separate. The left hemisphere is lonely because it sees itself as separate. Okay? So when we suppress our special, we create this civil war inside between our human self and its need to be special and our ego that's actually trying to compete with itself and with the world by being more and more spiritual. We create this ferocious inner conflict inside, which is an experience of separation. There's more and more gap between the piece that is trying to lift and the piece that's trying to pull us back down. Okay, so the crux of this particular feedback loop where things get really, really painful is that separation. And that creates this soul level insecurity. And it's not a self-confidence issue. It's not a positive thinking issue. It's an integration issue that, no, there is a wound inside you, and you're not going to feel whole until you find and heal that wound.
Precisely my experience.
Okay, so then that manifests in the world is this never enough, never enough, never enough, never enough. I constantly have to be asking the question, am I good enough? Am I better than that person? Am I less than that person? That constant testing, measuring, superior, inferior. It's just hardwired in the neurochemistry then. And then we start seeing the whole world in terms of dehumanization. We start seeing, well, I must be the human in order so that I can be the good guy in this story, which means that everybody else has to be either victims or villains or NPCs. And so we create more and more external conflict in our lives. Okay, now that really hurts. Now we're hurting internally, we're hurting externally. So we're just in so much pain, and that can loop into shame as you experienced. And so we desperately need something spiritual to make us feel good again. So we go chasing another meditation retreat, another immersive experience, another drug trip, another meditation process, something to lift away from the pain. And there's a very well-established, understood name for that process called addiction. Right? So spiritual pride, I'm a 12-step addict. Let's be clear. Right? I'm very clear what my drug of choice is. I really like feeling special. And there's a piece of my brain that really likes feeling better than other people. Smarter than other people, more spiritual than other people. It is in there. Okay? My job is to love it, not be it.
So help me understand, when you talk about shadow work, when you've got to get down to that bedrock, what have you found most effective?
Fantastic. So one more framing thing before we go there. So just to drive this home, the goal is over time we shift from being an ego to having an ego. Okay, so that's the goal. And how we start doing it, the start of it is what I call a set of key distinctions. And this is one of the biggest things I got from my reverse engineering. And that's actually something I would offer you for your book and your own writing as you start to move from student to teacher more and more. Okay. A lot of the most successful authors in the self-help space have, and they usually don't know what they're doing. Oftentimes they just sort of chance upon it. But like I did a lot of work with a coach named Steve Chandler who really consciously does this. And I got to see him do it and model off of that. And it's work based around what I call key distinctions, where you find a choice point in consciousness. So much of the self-help industry is organized around one key distinction, which is victim versus owner. Victim versus owner.
Okay.
When you feel something negative inside of you, you feel upset emotionally, do you go into victim consciousness where you blame somebody else for your problems? You caused that. I'm the victim of you making my emotions. Or do we take ownership of our emotions because that's where our point of power is? And like if you look at Crucial Conversations work, which is a phenomenal piece of work in the business space, they worked with that distinction and translated it into business, right? You look at 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Covey. Basically, each one of those 7 habits is a key distinction. So key distinctions are these chisels in consciousness where you can find a crack, put the chisel in, and hit the hammer 1,000 times. They're tools. They're not ideas. The mind, particularly for really smart people, wants to see these as ideas. No, these are root spiritual practices. Okay, that you turn into meditations. They become like feedback loops, like subroutines in your brain that you want to be running all the time as like their own question. Where am I at right now on that distinction? Okay, so the first of these in this context is what I call spiritual ascension versus spiritual integration. When you're trying to climb the ladder of consciousness, and this trap is embedded in Ken Wilber's work, in David Hawkins' work, it's just lurking there. You know, anytime somebody puts a ladder, now the ladders are there, they're real, but they open up this trap of, oh, well, I'm just going to climb the ladder to heaven, right? Where's the stairway? Okay. As opposed to spiritual integration, which is the embodiment. It's the transcend and include. Okay. Now, it isn't that I'm being my body, but it's that I'm fully being in my body.
Okay.
Do you see the distinction?
Yes, I do very much. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Like I spent a lot of time for many years. I lived in the top, so many inches of my body and tried very hard to pretend there was nothing below the neck.
Me too.
Right. So that's not embodied. Right. But you can also go down the path of worshiping the body and trying to be the body. No, the body serves the mind, which serves the soul. There's a clear hierarchy. Okay.
How do you know that? Like on specifically that piece? Because there are some people that would say, even in the McGill-Christian model, that the right hemisphere is connected to the heart and body, that has access to more information than the left hemisphere. Therefore, in that model, the body, quote unquote, is superior to reason.
Okay, so in that, if unpack that, it's not because the body is superior to reason, it's because the body is a channel to a higher form of reason.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
And that's truth.
Right.
So a lot of intuition shows up somatically.
Yeah.
Right. We talk a lot about, Nicole and I do a lot of work on training intuition and unpacking the different flavors of intuition. And specifically, intuition shows up as a sensing. It's a feeling, and it very frequently shows up in the body. It rarely shows up, it does sometimes, but it much less frequently shows up as thoughts in the brain.
Right.
Okay, so it's absolutely true that one of the best ways to open your connection to your soul is through the body.
Got it.
Okay. But make clear which is which.
Yeah. So it's your soul communicating through your body, not your body being like in itself the source of higher intelligence.
Yes, 1000%.
Got it.
Very, very important. Ken Wilber calls that the pre-rational transrational fallacy, and we see it all over the place, where people then start worshiping pleasure and okay, we're the more polyamorous we are, the more spiritual we are, and there's all sorts of traps there. Any emotion must be spiritual. You know, I need to process my emotions and live in emotions forever. No, there are pre-rational things that are less evolved than reason. There are many trans-rational things that are much more evolved than reason. Really, really, really important to know the difference.
Carry on. Got it. Very clear.
Great question. Okay, second key distinction. And we've talked about this. When you start noticing your spiritual pride, because it's there, do you try to bury it? Do you make it the bad guy? Do you make it the problem you need to fix, control, conquer? Does it become the dragon in the story you're trying to tame? Or do you mine it? And I actually love that word because the process of mining, of healing your shadow, is mining it, literally. You have to go from not mine to me. It has to become part of who you are, so that then you can heal it and disidentify with it healthily and make it mine. Okay, so are we burying our shadow and our need to be special, or are we mining it?
Can you give me an example of how that works in practice with something either in your own life or something you see as a common shadow trait? How do you go through that process?
Okay, so let's work with my voice, my addiction. So my addiction of special, when I notice in my brain that my brain is asking the question, who am I better than, who am I less than? Okay, now there are two very different flavors to that, because it's not this everyone's equal and there's no hierarchy and there's no distance, like everybody's the same. That's not true either, right? If you have a black belt in jiu-jitsu, that's a different thing than having a white belt in jiu-jitsu. Okay, they're not the same. Okay, and it's important to know those things, okay? Particularly if you're trying to fight somebody. Yeah. Okay, but if I'm doing it, if there's an emotional energy of insecurity attached to the thought, I'm like, okay, there's my repressed special again. There's my special addiction. Okay, and as we're going to talk about, there are a number of processes for how you work with that, which we're going to get to here in just a minute. Like there's a bunch of stuff coming. One of the things I do a lot is change the question, which is actually this next distinction. So I notice the places where my brain's proving worth, trying to say I'm special, and I work on, well, how do we change the question to value? Is there a relationship here where we can give and receive value? And sometimes there's not, and the answer is no. It's an honest question. In coaching, one of the most important things is to understand that value lives in the client, not you. It's something you bring out of them. And so there are many people you can't create value with. And there's, it's like I say, there's always, for any coach, no matter how primitive your skills are, there's at least one person on earth that you can't help at all. And there's at least one person on earth that you could offer life-changing guidance to.
Well, at the start of my journey, it was something that really preoccupied me, though, because like when you have a very specific professional skill that either exists in you or because of the seat that you occupy in a job, like
Right.
You are a sales trader, investment bank, commission flows through you because of the seat that you occupy. It's very easy to determine what your value is. But when you're in the spiritual industrial complex, you're like, oh God, my value might be determined by my level of enlightenment and therefore what I can charge clients, which also seems to be related to how transformational this experience is for them, which either leads to you inflating your worth or charging too little. And I'm sure you've run into every variant of this.
All of that.
Yeah.
And so, and this is the key, because remember the distinction from 2 ago. Okay, again, so true value is not spiritual ascension. It's not giving them a state experience.
Yeah.
It's helping them develop and integrate. Okay, and how that's done is actually the heart of coaching. And it's actually one of the biggest things that it took us 23 years to reverse engineer, because it's not well understood. It's actually largely mystery. And so you have people with really good intentions running around trying to think that they have to be the most spiritual person ever and create the highest peak state experiences if they're going to charge enough to live. And that's not at all true.
See a lot of that. Yeah.
Right? If you can take somebody whose life is on this trajectory and move them to this trajectory, there's an integral of the delta between those two curves, and that's the value you're creating. But how do you measure that? How do you know that? Right? That's why a black belt and a real grounded practice really takes 10 years or more. Because you've got to develop a lot of data points, a lot of what I call red flags, yellow flags, green flags. Right? Above all else, I am fantastic at client qualification. I am very, very good at telling who I can help and how much. And then watching for the yellow flags of like, okay, we got to talk about this, because if we don't deal with this right now, we could very easily just stay static or even go worse. I could cause harm and make things worse rather than better, which heaven forbid.
And then the red flag?
The red flag is I'm not working with you either at all or until we've slowed down and addressed this first. Right. Like a great example of this would be, I had a client long ago, one of my earliest clients, who came to me and said, okay, I'm a recovered gambling addict in a 12-step program. I'm having relationship conflicts with my wife. And I said, great. You're in a 12-step program. You're going to your 12-step program. You're in the recovered stage. Yes. Okay. We're going to work on you and your wife. He signs a check. He signs a contract. We start work. And in our first session, he's like, oh, well, I fell off the wagon and I'm gambling again. And I stopped going to 12-step programs. Red flag, stop. No, do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Here's your money back. I'm not working with you until you're recovered and back in 12-step. And he didn't. And so that was not a relationship.
I know.
Right? But not my problem.
Yeah.
Okay? Not mine. There are people I can help. There are people I can't help. It's my job to know the difference.
Got it.
Okay? Notice proving worth is I got to be able to help everybody.
Right.
Providing value is an honest question based in a faith in the universe. It's a faith that the other person's soul knows what it's doing, even if I don't.
But the rub is the economic insecurity that comes with starting a practice also corresponds with you not being able to turn away clients.
Yes, absolutely. That's why I say it's very hard to build a successful coaching practice if you haven't already built a level of financial success.
Yeah.
It just really, really, it's not impossible. We did it reliably with dozens, if not hundreds of people over 10 to 15 years. But it was a very small minority that were willing to do the work, and it's hard going. Much, much easier to come in with a level of success first and then try to build a coaching career from there. So I've done a lot of speaking, just on that one more data point. I've done a lot of speaking in the Vistage community, which is CEO peer groups. It's the largest group in that space. And I've got to know a lot of the chairs in that space, including some of the leaders in that community. And again, I'm always studying reverse engineering and everything. And they're aware that the biggest predictor they found of whether a new chair is going to be successful or not is how much success they had before and whether they need the money or not.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not all doom and gloom. Here's the good news. Okay, so here's the virtuous cycle that you can build instead. And we're going to talk about how to do this. You start with the same problem. As you start waking up, you have more spiritual power, and that causes spiritual pride. The first two steps are exactly the same, but you start changing your relationship to it at every step in the process. So instead of trying to conquer it and control it, you mine it. And you build containers of healing where you use that as the heart of your spiritual practice. Okay, spiritual pride done right is one of the root spiritual practices that exists on the planet today.
Tell me more.
Okay, so story. When I was first in USM, first year of my master's degree in spiritual psychology, 2002, spring of 2003, I met a phenomenal human being, now deceased, named Andre Delbecq, a friend of my father's, who was at the University of Santa Clara, Jesuit university, and he ran the business school there. And he taught a class in spirituality and business leadership. And deeply, deeply spiritual human being. And I went and took his class. And as part of that, we would do some journaling exercises. And I turned in a particularly arrogant journal entry where I was bragging about how much more spiritual I am than all these stupid NPCs out there, basically. And he said, Brian, let's take a walk. And we walked through the Santa Clara campus, this beautiful campus in Silicon Valley. And he lovingly hit me upside the head with a 2x4. And he's like, Brian, if you go through any of the spiritual traditions, any of the great religions from any corner of the earth, if you study any of the mystics, any of the saints, anybody who's really done their work, they disagree on a lot of stuff. But one thing that they all agree on, in my experience, and I'll never forget his words, he said, they all come down very hard on the topic of spiritual pride. As in, pay attention to this one. And they found different ways to work with it. And he didn't necessarily have all the answers for how you work with spiritual pride. That's been a lot of the reverse engineering. But I got the question from him. Right? I got out of that story, somehow deep in me, I got the truth that this is not something to be glossed over. This is root. Okay? So we build the practices for how we heal it as it comes up, how we integrate it, how not mine becomes me becomes mine. That is the heart of integrated spiritual development. Because you're releasing, it's like you've got a hot air balloon and you're releasing the ballast off of the balloon rather than trying to just add more hot air and more ballast at the same time. Okay?
But
that
pride to mining, I can understand how you mine shadow. How are you mining the pride?
It's the same thing. I'm gonna go to that exactly next. You're getting perfect sequence of questions. Okay. So then that's this question of providing value then. How do I create value in the world? Where can I help? which then moves to external development of other relationships and other people. You start helping grow other people. Instead of conflict, you get development of the relationships that matter most. Me and my wife. Nicole is exquisitely aware anytime I have an ounce of spiritual pride that I'm not owning. Okay, another hilarious story. Wasn't at the time. Nicole, myself, and a dear friend of mine named Jay Fizette, this will be 12, 15 years ago, we went to a conference of transformational leaders that we were part of. And it was the first time that this particular group that I'd been a founding member of had invited new people in. And the new people were a lot more insecure and arrogant coming in. And so as we drove off, I commented about how insecure and arrogant and prideful all of those people are. And I'm like, I'm so glad I'm past that. And Jay and Nicole looked at each other, and I'm driving. They looked at each other, and they're like, we can't tell if he's joking. And I wasn't joking. And they're like, honey, you have more special needs than anyone you've ever met. Like, you're not past this particular problem.
No.
Right? So, but she helps me by being an honest mirror for me. And in return, as I do my work, I'm able to help her develop too.
Well, I don't know if it's the right time, but you said something to me when we first met that I'm still thinking about, which is that you can only see as much in yourself as someone else can see in you. Can you just expand on that? Because that kind of blew my mind and is still blowing it.
Yep. So let me describe it as an experience, because it's hard. At the heart of mature love, what is it to be in a deep, mature, loving relationship? We say there's three things. There's probably many things, but there's three in particular we call out. There's giving and receiving, which is obvious. There's something else that's really important. And the third one that I'm coming to right now is seeing and being seen. And the more you grow in integrated consciousness, not just awareness, but integrated consciousness, we call it space holding. You can hold space for other people. Their consciousness fits inside of the space you can see. Okay? But the fewer people can see you.
What do you mean?
So Nicole has never met anyone in her life, and she's studied with many spiritual teachers and gurus, who in retrospect actually saw her. Saw all of her.
Because she's so expansive.
Yes. After 17 years together, 15 married, I think I see more than half of her. She agrees. I can't calibrate what percentage it is, but I'm clear it's not 100%. But here's the thing. Every time that she supports me and challenges me, and usually there's some poking and me getting really pissed off involved, as she amplifies my shadow and throws it back in my face, and I blame her for it, and and then finally I own it and work it and heal it. Every time I grow in my consciousness, she is able to see more of herself. Her own self-awareness grows. And it's like a hardware limit. Like at some very, very, very deep physical level, we're all mirroring each other. We're all in a house of mirrors somehow. And we never actually really just see ourselves. We're all bouncing off of others like radar. And there's some type of energetic dynamic where you can only see in somebody else as much as you can see in yourself. If you've got 10 gallons of awareness, self-awareness, you can only see 10 gallons of the other person. But if somebody else has never seen 20 gallons of you, it's very hard for you to see 20 gallons of you.
I don't think this is what you're saying at all, but it's been very transformational in my marriage. That one, like pointing out someone else's faults directly obviously never works and is catastrophic. But over the last few years, my wife and I have both realized how we're not neurotypical by any means. And once we have an operating manual to ourselves, we've started to give it to the other person. And now they can operate us and understand what's going on in our head.
100%.
They have a theory of our mind. But that doesn't sound like the same thing, is it?
Different thing. Very important thing you're describing, but different.
Yeah. How are they different? Explain that to me. I know this is a bit abstract.
No, it's really important. I'm just subtle. Okay, so in our family, we have a language called maxed. My wife, daughters, myself are all neuroatypical in different flavors. And actually, that's the book Nicole's writing right now called Surviving Your Superpowers, which is the different forms of neuroatypical patterns that show up based on different intuition awareness patterns. It's a phenomenal thing, and very excited for that. But what it looks like is Friday night, we come home from school and work and dropping off the housekeeper and everything, and I'll often pick up pizza on the way home or something, and I'll dump the pizza on the dining table and shout, "Everyone to your corners!" And we all have a corner of the house that we run to so we can decompress alone. Okay, and we have language like, okay, I'm maxed level 3 of 10 right now. And Nicole knows that if I get to a 3, that's throwing yellow flags off. Because if I hit a 4, I'm alone in a dark room for 24 hours. Okay, if I get to a 6, I'm in acute emotional pain, physical, nervous system, like it's bad. Like I'm melting down. So I work very hard. So actually, to be fair, that's probably off by 1. I'm probably 4 to 5 in a dark room for 24 hours. Probably 5, but anyway, depending on how we calibrate it, I work very hard to keep my nervous system in the 1 to 3 range, and built my life around that. Same thing for Nicole in different ways. Same thing for my girls. That learning how to back up. The more awareness you have, the more electricity, for want of a better word, the more spiritual power, the more current is running through your physical nervous system. One of the fundamental problems driving the waking up right now of people in this group that we're talking about, I had of the 3 waves, the 3rd wave that we're talking about, is, and I mean, there's a lot of the spectrum stuff that's happening, the ADD, so much of the neuroatypical right now is a lot of the younger generation are coming in more aware. They have more channels open, which means that there's a higher current running through their nervous system without the handbooks yet for how to work with that. You and your wife are learning the handbooks for your nervous systems. Phenomenally important. That's how you help your body handle the demands of your soul.
Yeah. And it's taken me, I first had my awakening experience in 2017, and I feel I've only really grounded it in music, massage, jujitsu, my actual work. Like there's 4 or 5 different things that I've realized in this sort of ecology of practice way that like, oh no, I'm about to burn up because I'm channeling too much kind of spiritual content, That's
it. That's the big mistake so many people are making right now, is they assume that spiritual awareness makes it life easier on your nervous system when it's the opposite.
Yeah. I see that a lot.
Yeah. Okay. That's different than the question of identity and seeing and being seen. I would guess that the more you see, I actually am guessing this is a dynamic you can watch for with your wife. The more you're expanding, the more you see her, watch what happens for her. I think you'll find that she starts waking up more and more and more as you hold space and mirror back more of her. And this is one of the reasons why this work needs to be done in community. And this is actually, I think, one of your callings is to help organize this, because there's this acute root need for good mirrors. Just getting people who can see more of each other. And it's not that one person has to see all the other person, but like if this person could see 10 gallons of this person and they have somebody else in the group who can see a different 10 gallons, but it's like 20 gallons of them is being seen. And then they can expand into 20 gallons of themselves and their own self-awareness. But if you grow up in a family where nobody sees you, it's literally crazy making.
Yeah. Well, but also I think in my experience with very, very high agency, egoic billionaire types is that they're used to projecting an exterior of such force. It means that the truly visible portion of them is really, really low.
Right. Yep. Totally. And so then that gets into a whole different thing, which is the journey of leadership, from heroic leadership to authentic leadership. And that's a whole different thing, which is a phenomenal topic for another podcast.
So let's go back. As people think about what you've said, and as we kind of land the plane on this, like, I think you've got a very clear model. How do we think about getting to that mining process? How would you, how do
I
you,
got tools. Here we go. Let me do tools.
Tools.
We have tools. Okay.
Tools.
Here are mining tools.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of part 1. Join us for part 2, where we get into granular detail on tools and practices for dealing with shadow.